Good morning, afternoon, evening. When we talk about sex, particularly from a male perspective, we often step into a space clouded by assumptions, stereotypes, and unspoken truths. Today, I want to invite us to explore this topic with curiosity, courage, and compassion. Sex, for many men, is not merely a physical act. It is a deeply layered experience, shaped by both cultural expectations and personal journeys. From an early age, men receive messages that link their worth to their sexual prowess, whether it's from locker room chatter, media portrayals, or societal ideals. But beneath this exterior lies a complexity often overlooked. At its core, sex can be a way for men to connect emotionally. While this may run counter to traditional narratives, many men experience sex as a space where words fail but connection flourishes. Yet, there's a tension here. On one hand, they yearn for intimacy, and on the other, they carry the weight of societal expectations that often reduce sex to a measure of performance. This dichotomy can lead to insecurity, frustration, and even silence about what truly matters, the need to feel valued and seen. Understand how men view sex. It's important to recognize the interplay of cultural norms and biological factors. Both of these forces, though distinct, shape male perspectives on intimacy in profound ways. Biologically, men are wired with certain instincts and hormonal drives. Testosterone, often called the dominance hormone, plays a significant role in shaping male sexual behavior. It influences not only physical arousal, but also factors like competitiveness and the desire for intimacy. Evolutionary psychology suggests that men across millennia develop patterns of behavior linked to the survival of the species, including the drive to seek multiple partners to ensure genetic diversity. While these instincts may have historical roots, they don't fully define the modern man's experience of sex. Here's where culture steps in. Cultural conditioning is a powerful force that shapes how men express and perceive their sexual desires. From a young age, boys are exposed to a wide array of messages about masculinity and sexuality. Movies, music, and even casual conversations often portray men as driven by an insatiable libido or as conquerors whose value is tied to their sexual success. This creates a narrative where sex becomes less about mutual connection and more about performance and validation. Consider how early socialization affects men. Many boys are taught to suppress emotions like tenderness, vulnerability, or fear, traits often associated with weakness in traditional frameworks of masculinity. Instead, they are encouraged to adopt a persona of strength, confidence, and sexual dominance. As these boys grow into men, sex becomes a realm where they may feel the need to prove themselves or conform to these ingrained expectations. Cultural norms also shape how men view relationships and intimacy. In some societies, discussions about sex and emotional connection are taboo, leaving men without a framework to process or communicate their desires healthily. For example, men may find it challenging to reconcile their natural biological urges with their emotional needs for connection, as culture often prioritizes one over the other. Furthermore, the influence of media cannot be overstated. From advertisements to films, men are bombarded with images and narratives that equate masculinity with physical prowess and sexual conquest. These depictions not only create unrealistic expectations for men, but also neglect the emotional and relational aspects of sex. However, it's crucial to understand that culture and biology are not destiny. Men are not confined to their hormones or the stereotypes they've been taught. By recognizing these influences, they can take steps to question and reshape their perspectives. The key lies in acknowledging the complexities of male sexuality, balancing biological inclinations with cultural insights, and creating space for healthier, more holistic conversations about intimacy and connection. When we unpack these layers, it becomes clear that men's views on sex are not fixed, but are instead shaped by a dynamic interplay of forces. By fostering awareness of these influences, we can empower men to move beyond limiting narratives and embrace a more nuanced and fulfilling understanding of sexuality. One of the most significant, yet often underexplored tensions in how men view sex lies between the desire for emotional connection and the overwhelming pressure to perform. On one hand, many men deeply crave intimacy, a bond where both partners are seen, heard, and valued. On the other hand, they face societal expectations that sexual encounters are more about performance than connection, more about satisfying an external measure of success than nurturing a meaningful bond. This dichotomy is crucial in understanding the male sexual experience today. The desire for emotional connection, sex, at its most authentic and fulfilling, is an opportunity for emotional connection. It is a moment where two people can transcend their individual selves and come together in a shared experience of vulnerability and trust. For many men, the most profound desire in sex is not merely the physical pleasure, but the closeness that comes from shared intimacy and emotional exchange where both partners feel valued and understood. When sex is rooted in emotional connection, it becomes a space of mutual respect, care, and understanding. This is where the complexities of a person's inner world can be safely shared. Many men long for this depth in their sexual relationships but struggle to articulate it, partly because they've been conditioned to prioritize physicality and outward signs of sexual success over emotional depth. For instance, men may not always feel comfortable expressing their needs or desires for emotional closeness. Society teaches them that being emotionally vulnerable, especially in sexual context, is a sign of weakness. But the reality is that emotional intimacy can transform the sexual experience, making it more meaningful and satisfying. Men often want to experience a deeper bond with their partner, to feel emotionally attuned and connected during intimate moments, yet they sometimes find it difficult to pursue this connection because of the dominant cultural narrative surrounding masculinity and sex. The performance pressure, in stark contrast to the desire for emotional connection, is the performance pressure that many men feel during sex. From the time they are adolescents, men are often socialized to think of sex as a means to prove their masculinity, strength, and desirability. This is where media, peer pressure, and societal norms come into play, reinforcing a singular, often unrealistic image of male sexuality, the idea of sex as a test of physical prowess and satisfaction. Whether it's the size of their body, the endurance in bed, or the number of sexual partners they've had, men are constantly evaluated on their sexual performance. The pressure to perform often makes it difficult for men to relax and enjoy the emotional aspects of intimacy. Instead of focusing on the needs and desires of themselves and their partners, many men become fixated on fulfilling an external expectation, often influenced by exaggerated portrayals of sex in movies and television shows. This pressure leads to stress, anxiety, and even feelings of inadequacy when men cannot meet these idealized standards. The narrative of sex as a performance can undermine the richness of emotional connection. For example, the focus may shift to how long or how well a man can perform, often sidelining the importance of mutual enjoyment or the emotional closeness that should ideally accompany a sexual encounter. Performance anxiety can result in a disconnect from the partner, leaving both individuals feeling unfulfilled despite the physical act of sex. The psychological struggle, the internal conflict that many men experience, is psychologically taxing. On the one hand, they may have an inherent desire to connect with their partner in a meaningful, emotional way, seeking a deeper form of intimacy. On the other hand, the societal pressure to perform upholds a contradictory message that seems to suggest that emotional connection is secondary or perhaps even irrelevant to the experience of sex. This dissonance can lead to feelings of frustration, self-doubt, and confusion. The psychological toll of this divide between emotional connection and performance pressure is further compounded by the lack of open conversation about sex. Men may not feel comfortable expressing their vulnerabilities, fears, or insecurities about their sexual experiences, leaving them isolated in their struggles. As a result, these internal conflicts may go unaddressed, leading to difficulties in relationships and overall dissatisfaction with their sexual lives. Breaking the cycle, recognizing and addressing the tension between emotional connection and performance pressure is essential for fostering healthier, more fulfilling sexual relationships. For men, the first step is to challenge the narratives they've internalized about masculinity and sexuality. Understanding that sex is not a contest or a performance, but a shared experience of intimacy, can help reduce anxiety and allow for greater emotional engagement. Creating a space for vulnerability, both in words and actions, enables a deeper connection that transcends the pressure of performing. This requires both men and their partners to engage in open conversations about their needs, desires, and boundaries, allowing for a mutual understanding of what truly matters. Moreover, couples who prioritize emotional connection over performance are often able to build stronger, more resilient relationships. Instead of focusing on the quantity or quality of sexual acts, they turn their attention to fostering mutual respect, understanding, and empathy. In such relationships, sex becomes less about meeting external expectations and more about sharing a meaningful emotional experience. One of the most pervasive and often damaging narratives surrounding male sexuality is the idea that vulnerability is incompatible with masculinity. Society has long conditioned men to believe that true strength lies in emotional stoicism, self-reliance, and the avoidance of any behavior that could be perceived as weak or feminine. Vulnerability in this context is often seen as something to be feared, suppressed, or hidden. However, this understanding of masculinity and vulnerability is not only outdated, but also harmful. For men to embrace a fuller and more authentic sexual and emotional experience, they must reconsider their relationship with vulnerability. The roots of masculinity and vulnerability from an early age, boys are taught to embody an ideal of masculinity that values toughness, independence, and emotional restraint. In many cultures, crying is discouraged, vulnerability is mocked, and the need for emotional support is minimized. Phrases like "man up" or "boys don't cry" enforce this rigid standard, pushing boys to reject their emotional needs and instincts in favor of projecting strength. This conditioning not only impacts how men engage with the world around them, but also affects how they engage in intimate relationships and view themselves as sexual beings. Within this framework, vulnerability, whether in the form of expressing fear, insecurity, or emotional longing, is often perceived as a weakness. In sexual contexts, this is particularly evident. Men may be afraid to show their true emotional desires or express concerns about intimacy because they fear being judged as insufficiently masculine. The very act of being emotionally open can seem like an admission of inadequacy, an admission that they are not real men. This fear of vulnerability manifests as a barrier to deep emotional connection, both in relationships and in sexual experiences. The mask of strength, while vulnerability is often seen as a weakness, strength in traditional masculine norms is measured by control, emotional distance, and self-sufficiency. Men are taught that to be in control means to suppress their feelings, avoid being too emotional, and maintain a stoic exterior at all costs. This mask of strength creates a paradox. While men may crave emotional intimacy and connection, they are simultaneously trapped by the very idea that showing emotional need is a sign of failure or loss of control. This disconnect can have profound effects on their sexual relationships. Sex, for many men, becomes a performance, an opportunity to prove their worth as a partner. They may worry about meeting physical expectations, measuring up to societal ideals of masculinity, or maintaining a sense of power and dominance in the relationship. All the while, their emotional needs for connection, closeness, and understanding remain suppressed. This performance is often fueled by fear of being vulnerable, whether it's about expressing insecurities, desires, or anxiety, say it's about sexual intimacy. But the truth is that emotional vulnerability is not a contradiction to masculinity. It is an essential component of a healthy, well-rounded sense of self. True strength does not lie in emotional suppression, but in the ability to express one's emotions in a constructive way. The ability to be vulnerable with a partner, whether it's sharing a fear, a desire, or an insecurity, is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of emotional maturity. In fact, it is often the men who can be open and authentic in their emotional lives who experience the deepest connections and the most satisfying relationships. The role of vulnerability in sexuality in the context of sexual intimacy. Vulnerability is the bridge that connects partners at a deeper level. When a man can allow himself to be vulnerable with his partner, whether it's admitting a fear of inadequacy, expressing his desires for deeper emotional connection, or acknowledging insecurities about his physical appearance, he creates space for a richer and more fulfilling sexual experience. This level of openness allows both partners to explore each other beyond the surface, to understand each other's needs and desires, and to forge a connection that is more than just physical. However, this requires a radical shift in how men view their role in sexual relationships. Men must move away from the idea that sex is merely a transaction or a performance to prove their worth. Instead, they need to understand that true sexual intimacy involves emotional transparency and the courage to share one's vulnerabilities. Vulnerability in sex is not about revealing flaws or weaknesses, but about sharing the full range of human experience, the fears, the hopes, the desires, the dreams that make sex a deeply intimate and transformative experience. Challenging the toxicity of masculine norms to embrace vulnerability, men must begin to challenge the toxic masculine norms that tell them that emotional expression is weak or feminine. This requires a cultural shift, one that celebrates emotional depth in men rather than mocking or suppressing it. It means redefining what it means to be strong and recognizing that true strength lies in the courage to be authentic, to express one's feelings, and to embrace emotional openness. By questioning these rigid norms, men can begin to cultivate healthier, more fulfilling relationships both with themselves and with their partners. Vulnerability, far from being a liability, becomes a source of emotional richness and connection. Men who can express vulnerability without shame open themselves up to deeper understanding, not only in their relationships, but also within their own selves. The power of emotional intimacy when men embrace vulnerability in their sexual and emotional lives. They create the foundation for true emotional intimacy. This kind of intimacy is not limited to physical acts, but extends to deep communication, trust, and mutual understanding. It's about knowing that a partner sees you, accepts you, and loves you not just for your strengths, but for your flaws and imperfections. This kind of emotional intimacy also fosters greater sexual satisfaction. When vulnerability is allowed to flow in a sexual relationship, both partners can let go of pretense and truly experience each other. They can communicate openly about their desires, preferences, and needs, leading to greater mutual satisfaction. Sex becomes more than just a physical act, it becomes an expression of shared emotional intimacy. Communication is often touted as the cornerstone of any healthy relationship, but when it comes to sex and intimacy, it is perhaps even more crucial. The ability to express needs, desires, boundaries, and insecurities openly and without fear of judgment is essential for cultivating a fulfilling sexual and emotional life. Yet, for many men, open communication about sex is a challenge. The silence surrounding the topic of intimacy can lead to misunderstandings, unmet needs, and feelings of isolation. Overcoming these barriers and fostering honest dialogue is key to unlocking deeper intimacy, understanding, and personal growth. The barrier to honest communication for many men engaging in open conversations about sex can feel like a minefield. From an early age, they may have learned that sex is something to be guarded or even concealed. Talking about it too openly may have been considered inappropriate or uncomfortable. This discomfort with open dialogue can create a sense of emotional distance between partners and prevent the sharing of true desires, fears, and needs. Part of the issue lies in the societal and cultural constructs surrounding masculinity. Men are often taught to avoid vulnerability, to suppress emotional expression, and to figure things out on their own. These norms make it difficult for many men to reach out to their partners for help, clarification, or understanding when it comes to sexual or emotional concerns. Men may be hesitant to express what they want or need in the bedroom because they fear appearing inadequate or weak. This fear leads to a lack of communication and creates a cycle where both partners are left uncertain about each other's desires and boundaries. In addition, the portrayal of sex in the media often exacerbates the problem. Sex is often depicted as spontaneous, effortless, and flawless a performance in which communication is either unnecessary or absent altogether. This unrealistic portrayal sets up an expectation that sex should be easy and without friction, leaving little room for the natural process of communication and negotiation that forms the foundation of healthy, consensual intimacy. The power of vulnerable conversations breaking through the barriers of silence and fear begins with vulnerability. For men, allowing themselves to speak openly about sex requires both courage and self-awareness. It involves the willingness to express not only their desires and fantasies, but also their insecurities, worries, and emotional needs. This act of vulnerability opens the door to a deeper, more authentic connection with their partner. By discussing what makes them feel good, what they may be anxious about, or what they need to feel emotionally supported during intimacy, men can establish a foundation of trust and understanding. This honest communication fosters a sense of safety and mutual respect, which is essential for building intimacy. Rather than viewing communication as a potential source of judgment or ridicule, men can begin to see it as an opportunity for growth both individually and within the relationship. When both partners are willing to communicate openly, it creates a dynamic where both people's needs are acknowledged and respected. For men, this means being able to express feelings of inadequacy or uncertainty without fear of judgment. It means moving away from the expectation that they must always be the dominant or confident partner, instead embracing a shared space of mutual understanding and connection. Active listening, an integral part of communication while speaking openly, is essential. So too is the ability to listen, truly listen. Communication is not just about conveying one's own desires and thoughts. It's about receiving, processing, and understanding the other person's perspective. In sexual relationships, active listening helps partners become attuned to each other's physical and emotional cues. For men, listening means being present, attentive, and empathetic, rather than just focusing on the next step in the process. It means setting aside preconceived notions of what sex should look like, and instead tuning in to what their partner is expressing, both verbally and non-verbally. It also means being receptive to feedback, whether it's positive or constructive. By listening to their partner's needs, men can adapt their approach and deepen the emotional and physical connection in their relationship. Active listening fosters an environment of trust where both partners feel heard and understood. It also enables both individuals to express their boundaries, their needs, and their emotional vulnerabilities in a way that feels safe and non-judgmental. In this context, sex becomes a conversation, a two-way exchange, rather than a one-sided performance. The role of growth in sexuality and relationships communication is not just about resolving immediate concerns. It is also a crucial tool for personal and relational growth. The process of discussing desires, preferences, boundaries, and emotional needs can serve as a mirror, allowing individuals to explore their own feelings and assumptions about sex. Through open dialogue, men can learn more about themselves, their preferences, their limits, and the emotional aspects of their sexuality they may have ignored or suppressed. Sexuality is not static, it evolves over time. People change both physically and emotionally, and so do their desires and needs. Growth involves being open to this evolution and adjusting one's perspective and behavior accordingly. For men, this means being open to learning about their partner's desires and growing together in the relationship. It may also mean reflecting on and unlearning certain expectations or assumptions about masculinity and sex that were instilled by society or culture. Growth within the context of a sexual relationship can manifest in many ways. It could be the development of more sophisticated communication skills, the deepening of emotional intimacy, or the discovery of new ways to connect physically. By embracing communication as a tool for growth, men can engage in a lifelong journey of self-awareness, learning, and improvement. They can challenge the limitations of traditional gender roles and redefine what it means to be a sexually and emotionally fulfilled man. Communication as a tool for healing. One of the most transformative aspects of communication in relationships is its ability to heal past wounds. Many men carry emotional baggage from previous relationships, societal pressures, or personal experiences that shape their attitudes towards sex and intimacy. These experiences may include feelings of inadequacy, past trauma, or unresolved conflicts. Through open and honest communication, men can address these issues with their partners and begin to heal. For example, talking about past sexual experiences, traumas, or fears can provide a space for both partners to process and understand how these experiences shape their current relationship. Vulnerability and trust are key elements in this healing process. As men feel heard and supported, they can release the shame or anxiety tied to their past experiences and create a healthier, more authentic sexual dynamic with their current partner. This process of healing and growth is not always immediate, and it may require patience and continued communication. However, when men allow themselves to speak openly and listen actively, they open the door to personal transformation and relationship fulfillment. Through communication, both men and their partners can move past old patterns, break through barriers, and create a deeper, more meaningful connection. In conclusion, the way men view sex is not defined by a single narrative, but is shaped by a complex web of cultural influences, biological factors, emotional needs, and personal growth. Men's perspectives on sex are influenced by deeply ingrained societal expectations of masculinity, which often promote ideals of dominance, emotional suppression, and performance. However, these conventional ideas of masculinity do not capture the full spectrum of human experience, nor do they reflect the richness of sexual and emotional connection that men can experience. Through acknowledging the complex interplay of biology, culture, and emotion, men have the opportunity to break free from limiting stereotypes and embrace a fuller, more authentic understanding of their sexuality. They can explore the delicate balance between emotional connection and performance pressure, moving away from a focus on validation and toward intimacy grounded in trust and mutual understanding. Vulnerability, once seen as a weakness, can become a source of strength, allowing men to connect more deeply with their partners and themselves. By engaging in open communication, men can navigate their desires, needs, and insecurities in ways that promote growth, healing, and mutual respect. At the heart of it all lies the recognition that sex is not a solitary pursuit to prove one's worth, but a shared experience of emotional and physical connection. True fulfillment comes not from conforming to an idealized image of masculinity, but from embracing the full range of human emotions and expressions in a supportive, open relationship. When men understand the value of vulnerability, embrace the power of communication, and let go of rigid expectations, they can experience a deeper sense of intimacy, satisfaction, and personal growth. Ultimately, by reshaping their understanding of what it means to be masculine and sexually fulfilled, men have the opportunity to experience sex not as a performance, but as a meaningful and transformative part of their lives, one that fosters connection, mutual respect, and growth both within themselves and with their partners. This shift towards emotional openness, vulnerability, and authentic connection can create the foundation for healthier, more fulfilling sexual and emotional experiences that reflect the true depth of what it means to be human.